haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups.
Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Hi, Kaz here with my friend Anka Richter, who's the author of the fantastic book, Cult Trip. She's bringing us an exciting event this year.
Thanks, Kaz. Australasia, get ready for Decult 2024, the first cult awareness conference in New Zealand, happening in Christchurch this October. Are you worried about a friend or family member who's in a group that may be causing them harm, or do you have your own story? Then join us for a weekend with experts from around the world, where those who've left cultic groups can share their experiences and meet professionals who can help them. Head to our website, decult.net, for all the info.
Come cult-proof your life at Decult 2024. I'll be there.
Hello, ladies. Welcome back to New Zealand. It's so great to see you.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you too.
You too. You can see we took like 2 photos when we were away because we were so busy at this international cult conference. We literally didn't get out to sightsee, and I had to scramble through my photos to find anything that wasn't related to the seminars. So this is us, a night scene here.
And for those of us who can't, who aren't watching this, just the context, where have we been, Liz?
We've been in Barcelona.
Yes.
Yes,
me and Liz have been in Barcelona, and Lindy, poor thing, didn't get to
I
come.
got left behind. I'm like the non-Christians in that series of The Left Behind, where people just get left behind, except, I mean, I was quite happy here. But yes, in the photos behind Liz and Kaz, for those who can't see, there are gorgeous street scenes of Barcelona, whereas in the background of my image, it's just a curtain and my plant. So I clearly didn't go. But ladies, tell me all about it. I was actually really sad to not be there. It sounded like you had such an incredible time with amazing international speakers. You were at a conference called ICSA, which stands for International Cultic Studies Association. And it's a group of people who meet annually, open to the public, open to academics, open to former members, open to current members as well. Sometimes they go, of culty type groups. And
to cult apologists as well. They can
and
go.
cult apologists, they are there, of course, in force. So, yeah, give me a summary. What is ICSA? I mean, even what about a quick bit of history? Do you know how many years it's been going for?
No, I don't.
1979 rings a bell. So
I think it's several decades.
ICSA isn't the conference. The conference is their conference. ICSA is a organisation that operates year round.
So jump on their website because they've got like research into cultic groups. It's phenomenal. It really is like just the meeting place of, anti-cult activity across the world, but with a real focus on, professional research. A lot of people are studying and in this field, and we were just so privileged. The atmosphere, it was so collegial. There was a lot of collaboration, a lot of interdisciplinary work is going on in this scene, and we were just so welcomed and warmly received, and people were just so delighted to meet us. They were aware of culty things happening in New Zealand and some activism, so that was quite exciting, and we had an opportunity
It was us, you and me, and the lovely Graham.
Graham is
His
his partner.
wonderful husband.
And Anka Richter was there from
Anka Richter, who was
so there was a wee New
Yep.
Zealand contingent,
Yeah,
and we ended up being on a panel, the three of us, to talk about the sort of culty scene in New Zealand, activism, advocacy, aid, the things that have been provided for cult leavers in our country. And then I had my own presentation on the blueprint of sort of the Gloravale Leaver Support Trust, a blueprint for social support organisations. And the audience was so warm. They just spontaneously applaud, like when they were encouraged by something. And I just came away with a huge sense of, I guess, gratitude for the people in New Zealand who have joined in and combined and collaborated together to work for positive change, because it's quite inspiring for other people in other countries. They really encouraged by what's happening.
It did feel a little bit like we were, a bit fresh-faced and exciting and inspirational on some level. They could understand our accents, which was helpful. There was the usual thing with fish and chips, the normal
so
thing there.
Just to recap, it's a weekend with multiple speakers, presentations, seminars,
4 days,
all that kind of thing going on. And but you're saying that you guys actually were involved with presenting a couple of things as well. Well, where do we start with you guys sharing what went on? Like, do you want to start with the things that you shared from about New Zealand, or do you want to?
That's probably a good place to start, I think, because actually I've seen there is a recording of it, and I'm not sure how stable it is, but we could actually link it in our show notes to the talk that we did.
Fantastic.
Whether it was, I think it's up on YouTube, and I think hopefully it stays. But we really
a recording of what you guys shared.
Yeah, I just watched the first bit of it to sort of see if it was, what it was. But yeah, there is one. We were really trying to kind of say that stuff is happening in New Zealand. It's a small country at the bottom of the world, has a high percentage of intentional communities that can go a bit culty per capita. And we're small, we're connected, we have ways to communicate information on a large scale because we're small. That's a little bit unique. And and we've been able to collaborate fairly effectively, as Cult Chat's an example of that, with other people working in the same sphere with like minds, and it's actually kind of getting stuff done.
It is. I think it was encouraging to share with people and have them respond. And I just saw people with like tears in their eyes, and they would come up after the presentations and say, wow, if we had that amount of support when we left our cult. One woman said, 3 family members of mine might still be alive. I mean, we're aware of the huge mental distress that occurs in people leaving these groups, and not everyone survives that. And there was that real atmosphere of there has been devastation wrought by these groups. And yet there was this also sense of hope, like we can work this out, we can figure it through, we can find roadmaps to recovery, and there is a hopeful journey. And so that was the theme of this year. It was the recovery sphere, and there is so much research. And I can tell just, looking at our conversation we're going to have, that this will be 2 episodes. We haven't flown all the way over just to keep and hold information to ourselves. We want to share it, but we want to encourage you that there are plenty of opportunities coming in New Zealand in October and November, with a series of conferences, workshops for therapists, and then another weekend down here in Timaru with some of the world's best, Jan Ulelach, Gilly Jenkinson. So we're taking opportunities to bring international experts. There's a group of us collaborating in there. And so we want to bring that to New Zealand and encourage people to come.
I think that's part of what we're talking about, that inspirational thing, that I've been hearing for years people say the most difficult thing for me was finding a therapist who understood. And that was a strong theme of the conference. I probably heard this idea of appropriate mental health support post exiting and the problems that people encountered. I probably heard it in 5 or 6 talks, or even more. This just repeatedly, people looking at what survivors were saying and the shortfall, this repeated shortfall. The people that the survivors come out and the helping professionals that they meet are just missing the mark. Even though they care, they're missing the mark. And that is leading to long-term delay in recovery. And so that's what I'm saying. This is exciting, that after years of having my peers say, if only I had a therapist who got me, and that actually we are actually we're changing the context in New Zealand.
Because they didn't just talk about not being able to find anyone, that many of these therapists or researchers, they've actually come out of cultic groups themselves. They've gone through this rocky road to recovery, and then they're like, there's such a gap of provision of service, I'm going to do it. And so they're not just giving up, oh, there's such a lack of service. They're like, I'm going to go out and change the world. And so you've got workshops and books and support groups and peer and all sorts happening in that sphere, and it's changing people's lives one at a time, and that's all you can hope to do. And I came away really encouraged that, the first therapist that a leaver meets is not actually the therapist that you go and sit at and pay for your weekly counselling. That often takes a number of years until people progress into that professional sphere. It's actually the people around them where they land. It ends up being their neighbours, perhaps their new church family, perhaps their job, loving people, grandma down the road, families that take you in. They are the first support people. They're effectively the first therapists. And I think the conference really reiterated how important that level of support is. And that's why I loved some of the seminars that, we ran, because we were able to give real concrete examples of, for example, of our Leaver Support Trust, how we've done it. And they're like just lapping it up, writing it down.
That reminds me of what Bessel van der Kolk said, right, at the conference in New Zealand, where he said the very first step for traumatized people is to help them to establish safe relationships, that is the first step to do on the road to recovery. And sometimes it's not a professional therapist, it might be just a safe friend or a caring neighbor, or a relative. So that's,
and I had that quote down here, not from Bessel's one, but from this whole seminars, we kept hearing it. The healing from unhealthy groups is find healthy people in healthy groups to establish trust and build relationship. So it's encouraging. That means the people listening to this podcast today, you can literally save a life. By your kindness and your care.
So that kind of leads me to a theme that did come out quite strongly to me, was the idea of peer support. And I bang on about this because I think it's really valuable, and I've seen it in action for myself and for some of the children of Centrepoint that I know, and I've also hit some resistance in that same space for this idea of peer support. But when it works well, my goodness, it's marvelous. And all these academics and, themselves, survivors, many of them, most of them, as you've said, Liz, were continually coming back to the research about why people need appropriate understanding peer support. But not all peer support is helpful. It has to have some sort of foundation, some boundaries, some kind of containment. But set up well, it can literally be the thing that heals people.
One of the most amazing things about the peer support was the concept that you need the psychoeducation with it. So peer support are more groups that are a little more casual and flexible than, say, a one-on-one therapeutic relationship with a paid professional. But a really essential part is psychoeducation. It's actually helping people understand themselves, their emotions, what happened to them in the group, and leading them together on a journey. Often these groups have cult members from different cultic groups coming in. Many of them are actually on Zoom now, just with what happened over that sort of COVID sphere. They went online. And so there are groups happening like all across the world. People are just Zooming in and going on this sharing journey. And one of the ladies, Catherine Machush, she said, seeing yourself and other people's stories is an important part of the journey. Listening to other people's stories is very impactful. You can feel empathy for other people's stories, even if you have no empathy for your own story.
That's interesting. I've just got a question here to clarify. When you're talking about peer support, because peers, to my knowledge, like a dictionary definition would just be like people your age group, right? Or other adults, right?
No, peer is
Are you
someone someone who's also been in a cult.
Okay, so you're specifically there talking about lived experience, people with lived experience. Yeah, okay. I just sort of clarify that because like peers, if it's just people your age or like random Joe blogs and Jane blogs, that can still be obviously incredibly powerful and incredibly important.
Definitely.
But right now
it's
you're
talking shared cultic experience that you can dissect in a safe group and
yes, okay, yeah, because we've been doing
all running.
But they're not actually necessarily trained. They're just someone who's walked along the journey with you, though they can be trained. But there's still an
because we've been offering them a couple of times a year through Olive Leaf Network, and we just I facilitate that with a counsellor because I'm not professionally trained in terms of counselling, but it's really nice co-facilitating with a counsellor. And then we discovered that limiting the group sizes to 6 is helpful because then everyone can get a chance to share in a session. But yeah, our model that we've been trialing, done it a few times now, is meeting with the same group of people for 6 weeks so that we can get to know each other and share your story, and then we stop. Whereas I know that, for example, Cult Information and Family Support in Australia, their model is more like a drop-in Zoom, and you can just drop in every month, and it's just once a month. So you can keep going, get to know people if you want, or you can drop on and out. So it's quite good to know that there are different models out there that people can try.
There are, and they said that any of those models, are fine. And topical 6 to 8 weeks. Again, that relaxed. There's no set formula. I was trying to work out, the value of having, say, one just for of our leavers. What's the value of that versus having a mix of people from other groups and experiences? And so, it was just amazing to chat to those people who run those and get that. So we really want to support the Olive Leaf Network. You do yours by Zoom, Lindy?
Yeah, we do it by Zoom. Yeah. So no, if anyone in New Zealand is interested to join one of those, feel free to contact us and to sign up, because I've got a wait list, and then we just do it twice a year at the moment. But yeah, hopefully we can do more of them in the future. And we've tried both. We've tried people from just one specific group, and that was really cool in a way, because people are like, oh my gosh, it's like this, the journey is almost exactly the same, just like watching Escaping Utopia, and people's journeys that they go through is so incredibly similar, even decades earlier, like someone who left 40 years ago, whereas someone who left 2 years ago, it's almost the same. And it was similar with the group that we did, which was for former exclusive Brethren members.
Brilliant.
But the last couple of times we've done a mix and had people from about 4 or 5 different groups,
powerful
and
too.
different ages and different genders, and that was really fascinating, because people had that thing of like, oh my gosh, like you were part of a well-being type cult, and yet wow, there were such similarities with my really tricky group. So
that kind of group really takes away some of the power. It takes away the sting of the sting of the snake. It's like, oh, it's just a flippin' playbook. About what these people are doing. We were all just duped by a manipulator.
That's right.
And whereas if you stay in the same group, potentially you don't get that element.
You don't get that same, oh my gosh, because everyone, like a bunch of us had that thing where like they'd all claimed that their group had the light, and that kind of thing, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, And
Steve Hassan, in one of his seminars, he said, he made it really clear, do not conflate religion with cults. Cults come in all kinds of cloaks, he said. He said, look instead for whether the group is authoritarian, because it's the authoritarian playbook that they're playing by. It's totalitarianism, it's the coercive control tactics. That's what's in common across all these groups. The content is less than important. But of course, they do use the content to manipulate.
Yeah, and
They
the
think they're
doctrine.
joining a nice Christian group because they want to serve God, and they think they're joining a political ideology because they want to save the world with a better system of government, or they think they're doing a well-being thing, but actually cults come in all sorts of cloaks.
Hey, you just mentioned that name, Steve Hassan. Is that how you pronounce it?
Hassan.
Hassan? Yeah, Steve Hassan. So he's a bit of a famous person in the culty world.
He
Do you want
he is quite
to,
famous.
you actually got to meet him? Was that
Oh, well, more than met him. He was.
What's he famous for those who don't know?
He's written about
Biting.
the bite model is
Bite model.
he did a PhD in which he either developed it or validated it. He may have
Developed and now getting
validated it. Is the model that has been mentioned probably 6 or 7 times on our different episodes. The idea
we did a whole one on the bite model, did we? Or
no,
I think we brought it into maybe our definitions of coercive control. So it's behaviour,
and other people have talked about it as they've gone along. They haven't necessarily said the bite model, but they've described it as they've talked about it. So
E for behaviour control, I for information control, T for thought control, E for emotional control. It's basically lists that you can work out the kind of coercive control that's going on inside the group.
How controlling is your group?
And he's getting the tool validated, so you'll be able to use it in like legal court cases and all sorts as a validated, researched tool.
Oh, so he didn't do that in his PhD.
Yes, yeah, and then it's a follow-on from there.
Oh, okay. He also developed the influence continuum, which is this idea that, on one end of that continuum is healthy influence, at the other end is unhealthy influence. And here are some of the features of healthy influence. Here are some of the features of unhealthy influence, and it's a continuum, which I really love that idea, because influence is part of humanity. It's part of being in a group. It's part of being a group animal. We want to do what everyone else around us is doing. So influence is critical to social activity as humans. So influence isn't bad. It's how we use influence that can become harmful. So that the influence continuum underpins his bite model.
Yeah, and I find his work helpful, and it expands, like Jan Jelich's term of what a cult is. And then the last 2 is all about systems of influence and control. And I feel like his bite model just amplifies that.
Yeah.
So
he was at the conference, and he was, I think I had a meal with him 5 or 6 times actually. So it's just like,
honestly, everyone's just on this very even playing field. There's just, I just didn't get a sense of egos with people, or I'm up here and you're down there. I just feel like people in this sphere are really genuine and wanting to help people.
You're all united, I guess, in some sense around quite a strong vision, right? Like of trying to help people stop getting caught into coercively controlling groups. Like that's the pretty cool, empowering and unifying vision.
So our lunch breaks were spent really kind of diving deep into different aspects of people's work and how we might be able to connect with others. So I think I found that really valuable, to hear a person talk and then to pull them over and have lunch with them and be able to kind of go, right, well, how does your work fit in with what we're doing in New Zealand? And could you be interested in what we're doing in New Zealand?
And could we please video you now and do a 5-minute clip? And so I don't know, did we do 20-something 5-minute clips, and they're on our Cult Chat Facebook page?
Yeah.
So,
yes, I enjoyed seeing them as someone who was left behind. Yeah, that was lovely to get those little wee snippets and a little opportunity to connect with some of the different people you were meeting.
Something that Steve Hassan said that struck me, because he's obviously in the academic world, but he was a former Moonie, so he has cult experience. But actually he had this really positive view. He said, have a positive future view about your recovery journey. Start where people are now and move them forward. So he had this nice sort of humanity in his approach to recovery and healing. And I actually found everyone's there for that same sort of reason. And a couple of the sessions that I found are very important, and Kaz, you might as well. We were able to join in Gilly Jenkinson's 2 seminars that were sort of pre-conference for a day. And one was for clinicians. And even though I'm not anywhere near a clinician, I was entitled and able and allowed to sit in on that. And then they had one for more just peer support and supporters. But just have all these clinicians, therapists, professionals, psychologists, whatever, sitting around in a round table environment.
Yeah.
Just sharing their tips about recovery. And for me, I found that to be extremely helpful, encouraging, given the last episode we did, 37, on cult recovery, because we ran our own session and we talked to you about it, Lindy, and then we've gone to Barcelona and had some more input. And I was actually very encouraged by that. And so Jilly laid out the roadmap to recovery, basically the deprogramming pattern.
Jilly Jenkinson, we've talked about her repeatedly. She was at the conference in Barcelona.
She won an award.
Yeah, she's a wonderful woman. She's coming to New Zealand to the Decult conference. And as you know, Lindy, because you've organised this, there's your book. You've just
then she's coming not just to Decult. Oh, it's so hard when you've got a fake background.
Yeah, hold it up to you, right against your body.
There it is. That's what you do, girls. Yes, so she's coming there. Then she's doing, you tell us, Lindy, what she's doing the Monday, Tuesday after Decult.
Yeah, well, on the Monday and Tuesday, straight after Decult, it's a separate event, but it's straight afterwards, just to capture
October 21st, 22nd?
Yeah, just to capture Dr. Jilly while she's in New Zealand. We are doing a 2-day workshop for people who are in professional roles who's supporting former cult members. So that is primarily mental health therapists, but also if you're like a social worker or a lawyer or a police person or somebody who's just in a professional role where you're interfacing with former cult members or current cult members, then these 2 days would be of interest to you, because it's going to be 2 days of jam-packed stuff directly with Dr. Jilly. And then also we're offering a special thing if you're in a professional role and you're a former member. So you've got your own kind of journey and direct experience with coercive control there that might kind of be rearing up now and again. Then we've got a special offer with Dr. Jilly of 5 days intensive course with her, and that'll be
work through.
That'll be
working through the Walking Free from Trauma and Coercive and Cultic Spiritual Abuse, which is the name of the book.
Yeah,
that would be amazing. And then she's going to have a little look around New Zealand, and then she's coming to Timaru Monday, the 4th of November. We will be hosting her down here. We're going to have a bit of a special weekend prior to that with some Goroval leavers with her and also Yanya Lalich. So on the Monday, November 4th, we'll be opening up for a day session with Jilly for those more in this region and those who can't make it to any of the other ones. And Jilly won an award at the ICSA conference.
Oh, she did. She won. I've forgotten the name of the award, but my goodness, it was very special.
PhD, and she's got her own lived experience, and she's a character. She might look like little old grandma who knits booties, but she doesn't, Lindy. She loves Star Wars and stuff like that.
Yeah. So how can you sign up for that, Lindy?
Head to the Olive Leaf website. If you just Google Olive Leaf Network New Zealand and then look at our events tab, and then that will take you to where you can register and pay. And actually we've got our early bird fee shuts at the end of July, so you've got a few more days there to grab our early bird fee.
So for those who can't and won't be able to make it, Jilly did the session in Barcelona and she laid out the roadmap for recovery, and I just found it was something that was so it's like it's the same roadmap, or it seems to be for everyone. And I know that everyone who leaves a cult is an individual person, and yet it is the same way that there's a pattern for a cult. It's a playbook. It's actually a roadmap to recovery, and it's remarkable, but you just don't know how long each stage will go. And so she said the first thing you have to do is unmask the leader. Wow, it's like the first step is unmasking them. They are not a deity. They're not a deity. They're a deeply flawed human being, narcissist, malignant one who feed off people. She said,
I call that the Emperor's New Clothes moment for those who know that fable of the Emperor's New Clothes. Yeah, it's that moment when you're like, no, that's not an emperor in a magical, beautiful outfit. That's just a naked old man.
Bring them down to earth. That's what she said. And see what they are. And so once you can understand that, then you can look at what happened to you in the group, how the group was formed, and how it was always formed around the preference of that individual. And we've talked a lot about that concept in the past. Secondarily, you need to challenge the introjects that shape us. My new favourite word. Kaz, what do you remember about introject?
The introjects, I didn't actually go to her talk for some reason. I can't remember why. But yes, it's the stuff that we swallow whole without examining, and that just ends up like sits in our stomach and just slowly gets absorbed into our system, and we never actually realize that we've taken it on board, and it's a bit poisonous.
It things you believe that the leader told you, that you need to you get sick because you don't have enough faith, that if you leave this place you're going to be damned, and they're just things you swallow because you don't have teeth when you're in a cult. And so basically the recovery is regurgitating the introjects and chewing them over. And it's like sorting through your worldview in many ways. And she said it's just so important to do it because in a cult, you don't have an opportunity to withdraw. And so you get shaped by these introjects, by these beliefs, and you struggle with them when you leave. So we need to find healthy groups to chew over our introjects.
Can I interject about the introjects? Because you went to Jilly's talk and I was going to the ones that were targeted at health professionals. And one of the things that came up, and I can't remember which talk it was, I think it was a woman in Finland was talking about the context there, and she was presenting some research where some former cult survivors were interviewed and some health professionals, nurses, some doctors, some therapists were interviewed. And one thing that came up was how ill-prepared and kind of almost sort of nervous or frightened the doctors were, or the nurses, the health professionals were, to talk about the spiritual world.
Oh, yes.
Yet, for all of these cult leavers, everything was spiritual, and that it really sort of struck me, because she basically said they're doing their patients a disservice to ignore this. And she was also talking about doctors and nurses. There's a big no-no in New Zealand. I feel there's a big no-no in New Zealand to bring the spiritual into the medical consult. It's changing with time as we become more culturally safe for our Māori patients and Pacifica patients, but still it's not considered to be fully a full part of our humanity. It's sort of an optional bit, an optional extra. But I think what was also mentioned, I think you and I went to that talk about spiritual abuse, didn't we, Liz?
We did.
In which I said, what's spiritual abuse? And you kind of regurgitated her statement, which was it was a
here it is. Spiritual
soul.
It is an injury or mistreatment of the soul. It's characterized by deception and manipulation, coercive control. So it's not about the religious content of it. Spiritual abuse is about the destruction of the inner being of a person.
Yes.
Who said that? Sorry, Liz.
That was Madeline Lamboli in the Spiritual Abuse Issues Among Girls and Women Living in a Closed Patriarchal Society seminar.
Yes. So the idea being that there was something about the destruction of the soul, that maybe a one-off event of physical abuse or some emotional abuse might not get to that level of kind of like flattening a person entirely from the depths of their being.
Dispossessing them of all power.
Yeah. Which is quite a lot bigger than an isolated event of abuse might be, because a person can be abused in an isolated event like an assault and still have their sense of who they are intact.
Yes. And on that note, she made it clear that the spiritual abuse is imposed by the community, the bad community, and not necessarily by the religion or the culture.
It requires quite a lot of wisdom to discern what actually is the harmful thing here and what isn't. And that is a journey that every ex-member has to go through, that deconstruction and reconstruction. So in the seminar, Kaz, where you were reflecting on that particular thing where some doctors and nurses and former members were together, did they give any tips of what people in the medical professions can do? Like, I'm just thinking of an example from my own experience where I was seeing a secular therapist at one point. I mean, I knew she, didn't hold to a classic religious view or whatever, which was fine by me. But at one point she asked, and I thought it was like really I thought she did it very sensitively. She just said, I know you're a person who has some kind of faith in a divine being. Has this faith given you any guidance in this area? And, I thought good on her. Like, she wasn't afraid to ask that. It wasn't like an awkward thing of, oh, I don't believe, so I can't ask you about that. Instead, she was acknowledging that, oh, for my client, this matters. And my client might have something to share that can help us here. So yeah, did they give any tips like that?
Well, first I just want to say there was two talks, one by this Finnish woman, Maria Bjorkmark in Finland, and another was by a French psychiatrist in France, who presented how basically the mental health service were failing their patients who had been disaffiliated from some kind of group because they were failing to understand and recognize the cult experience and what their patients needed. And those who did got basically better treatment. So that was obvious in some ways, but it was a formalized study. It was another study. But yes, wow. This other woman who's a Maria Bjorkmark's a nurse, ex-nurse, and now a professor, I think, of university. She talked about, she kind of laid it out. She said, ex-members are living between two different worlds. They're living with fear and guilt. They're broken as a human being. They're facing sorrow and pain over what is lost. They live in constant fear of both life and death, and they're humiliated as a human being. And you're like, that's just like, like it's heavy. It's heavy. I mean, that is, to me, that describes what you're saying before about the soul being destroyed. So that she talked about it being a lifelong process to heal and to find one's true self and build a new way of life. So then she talked about what is actually caring and supportive of health for these people. And at the end of it, she says, it's obvious stuff. I don't even know why I'm having to say this. It's obvious. But the problem is it's not happening for these people. And I would postulate it's because of that idea of spiritual abuse.
So.
That idea that spiritual abuse is not being recognized to the true depths of the soul destruction. And that is, as you said before, it's independent of faith, independent of religion. You could have deep spiritual abuse if you're in a large group awareness training program that doesn't even talk about God, because it's that destruction of the soul.
And people think that when you leave that group, you're just not going to that church anymore, then you should begin your journey. Like, your problem's over. No, it's not.
No.
Because of those introjects that you've swallowed whole.
You've been internally destroyed, your identity stripped out. That quote you read at the beginning was phenomenal, because one of the other ladies I went to a seminar over talked about the straddling of two worlds.
Yeah.
There it is, former members experience a mind-heart separation. They struggle to straddle the two worlds.
Oh, yeah. Well, in my talk, the nurse I was talking about, she came back to some actual things that are necessary for people after they come out of groups. And like I said, it's fairly obvious, but what she said is they need to create, and this is in a health context, in a health relationship. So doctors and nurses, please listen. What they need is to create a relationship built on trust and safety. They need to have confirmed what they experienced. They need to understand, the therapist or the doctor or the nurse needs to understand how disaffiliation has affected the person's life. They need to support the broken human being, and they need to provide guidance in finding a new life. And then she said, of course, this is pretty obvious, but people are not getting this.
And so a 15-minute appointment with their doctor.
No, and you wouldn't expect it. I wouldn't expect it. It's over a time frame.
Build a relationship.
Yeah, and the criticality of that. They feel like soft things. They're not like, you're not writing a script. You're not sending off to a referral. You're not enrolling in a program. You're just creating safety.
Yeah, it brings me back to a Gloriavale member who actually needed to go to a doctor and just managed to arrange it just as they were sort of leaving. And we selected a Christian doctor because they felt like that would be someone who they could, just trust. They had a lot of mental distress. And this person offered to pray with them And the leader just came out like crying that someone would show so much love and care. Like they said, I've never been shown so much care and love in my whole life in this group. And they couldn't believe a doctor would do that. That just did something, because then that person was able to go on and get health needs met, Just that simple thing.
Just reminded me of something there, Liz, my beloved Nana, who's featured in our previous podcast over her funeral. But a bunch of years ago, she was prayed for by a doctor, and she told her husband, I don't know whether she felt she had to or she just shared it because she was moved by it, but he felt so terrible that it was a breach of their separation edict that he went and confessed it to the priest. And my Nana got disciplined, like got church discipline, and got in a lot of trouble for daring to share faith like that by receiving care from a doctor. So I do think, there's a doctor, I mean, go for a doctor to do that or to create a safe space to acknowledge the faith. But also be so careful, because that's contraband. It might be illicit to do that.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, is that in this situation for that woman, prayer was absolutely appropriate. For many other people, it will be a very bad thing to do. And it will trigger that person completely.
And
so
they asked me to ask them, like, prior, do you think they're open to like really talking about some of the things? Okay. And we'd actually had this, with the client's permission, I was, just sort of assisting, and had passed on that they were very open to.
That's nice, right? Okay, so it was like established. Would you like me to do this? Is this safe to do this? And then they did it. That's awesome, super.
Yeah. So it was interesting in that study I was mentioning that the healthcare professionals were asked what they needed, what they would like to do this better. Yeah. And they said, give me more knowledge. So they recognised they needed to know more about this topic. Yeah. Said they wanted to know how to bring up and deal with religious questions, because that was where they were getting stuck, this awkward area of how do we talk about this?
Yeah.
And they said they wanted to know about different religious backgrounds. So recognising that actually there's a lot to know, and you can't actually know about every group. But maybe that was the sort of actually starting to think about, well, I do need to learn a lot about this group, clearly, because I've got a patient from this group. And that they needed to know about specific groups. And the key thing that they said, I think this was so interesting, they said we need to reflect on our own position in regard to religious matters.
Wow.
That's the personal bias that the clinician brings into the room.
Fascinating. Because I went to that conference, and there weren't it wasn't a conference of faith in Barcelona. Actually, I would say the majority of people there were probably more secular than anything. And yet even those secular people have had lived experience in cultic groups where religion may have been used badly. They're the ones saying that religion is just the cloak, that if you want to find healthy community, perhaps look at it in re-establishing yourself in a healthy religious community. You've got that person doing your talk. My guess is if they were like the average person there, they're not actually a person of faith themselves, but they're recognizing the importance of healthy faith in a recovery.
Well, she never said faith. She said spiritual abuse. It was all about this idea of a spiritual domain. And I think that's something that we don't talk about in a secular society. And there's the problem. Don't talk about it. So we don't have the skills, and we think, oh, that's not our domain. That's the domain of the church.
I wonder if that's a very Western thing, because I'm thinking about a couple of times when I've had the privilege to visit some places in Asia or some other countries, and chatting with a conversation, one of the first conversations a stranger would ask me would be things like, what is your age? And things like, are you married? And things like, what religion are you? Things that here in the West, if we're chatting with a stranger, those are three kind of a little bit taboo things that you wouldn't just launch straight into asking someone. It would be considered impolite. So I wonder if this might be different in different countries around the world, but probably particularly a Western context, right, where there's trying to separate kind of the sacred and the secular. We've tried really hard to do that and to push this idea that we shouldn't ask about spirituality. It should be private and personal, and it could be awkward to talk about it. And so we've swung the wheel so far that way, and now we're realizing actually, oh dear, this divide between sacred and secular is not so cut and dried, and we need to have tools to talk about it.
And for the disaffiliated from a spiritual or religious group, or have simply experienced deep spiritual abuse that's not concrete, it's something into their soul, as we said before, it needs to be discussed, and we do them disservice by staying away from it.
And there's an easy way to discuss it, because there are two words that exemplify the issue of spiritual abuse, and they are called coercive control. And this was just this massive thread, and maybe that's what we need to talk about until we end our first session. We've done 2 episodes on what is coercive control, but literally every single one of the 20 seminars I went to mentioned coercive control. Some were deliberately on that topic. There is amazing research going on, and it is the key issue in cults. It's the key issue in domestic abuse. It's the key issue in trafficking. It's the key issue in slavery. It's just the key issue. Coercive control.
Intimate partner violence, child abuse.
It's the key issue. And so there's a heap of research, interdisciplinary research going on. And I went and sat in on the research into coercive control. And I've just got a list and an armload of quite recent research that's coming out. And I wanted to share that the research, it is undeniably clear that people who are growing up in coercively controlling environments will have high levels of psychological distress. The new research has created tools to measure how coercively controlling your group or your environment is, tools to measure what psychological harm is. They've done correlations, and wow, guess what? More than 0.9 correlation, like a perfect match, pretty much. You expect it. So then I look at a group, say like Gloravan, and I think you're extremely coercively controlling. So of course we're seeing extreme levels of psychological distress, which is why agencies should be sitting up and taking notice. Not just about the overt physical violence and the sexual violence. It's about coercively controlling behaviours. You get cognitive malfunctioning, unhealthy consequences like disassociation, depression, anxiety, PTSD. Doesn't matter what the context is. You're always going to have trauma coercion and trauma bonding in these groups. Your identity is dominated by this abuse. It is the abuse, you know.
But can I say something that was mentioned in a group talk I went to by Andrea Silverstone, who I think has got a history in social work, and it was all about coercive control. What is it? She basically said we've got a real problem. This is in Canada, and I'd say it's same in New Zealand. The problem with siloing when it comes to supporting people who have gone through coercive control. And she'd say, you know, the woman who'd experienced domestic partner violence, who might end up on the, you know, poor and having to prostitute herself, wouldn't be joining up the fact that she was getting coercive control at home and coercive control with her pimp, and maybe grew up with a coercively controlling father in a domestic violence situation herself. And so she's saying, well, you can't keep on looking at who is doing the coercive control. You need to look about the impacts across the person, and not kind of like in New Zealand, you can go to a refuge centre if you've been coercively controlled in a domestic partner situation, but if your partner's not hitting you and you've come out of a group, can you go and get a bed at a refuge centre? I don't think so.
No.
You know, it's coercive control. It's that destruction of the person's soul that we're talking about. It's just happening in a different context, and we're not joining up across the person's whole life.
That's it. Yep. And that's that concept that groups have different content, but coercive control is the thread. And there's a thread, and there's that concept too that people leaving cults and groups can find themselves sort of cult hopping. The concept of maybe joining themselves to another group that they think might be healthy, but then it also has coercive, control going on. And sometimes people leaving cults can begin a family cult. They take the behaviors of the group, and then they just sort of continue with them and with their own children and in a relational aspect. You were with me in Dr. Christine Coccio's Control and Coercive Control in the Home. Powerful seminar, paralleling domestic abuse and cults. All the tactics are similar. They're all at play. They all involve grooming, coercive control, and
child is being coercively controlled by the parent.
Yep, and it says lifelong implications for relationship building and trust. Their foundation of trust is annihilated. The ages of 10 to 13 are extremely significant. And I know now because the first 1,000 years of a kid's life are important, but apparently there's a second lot of 1,000 days. Sorry, the first 1,000 days, 0 to 3, in a kid's life are important for attachment, neurodevelopment, bit of plasticity there. Another opening in the brain between 10 and 13 for new patterns to be laid down. But that's when groups like Groreval absolutely go at kids and try to get them the ideology stuffed into them before they hit about 13. Then they start turning against their parents, loyalty to the group. All the introjects are just being swallowed and chewed, laid down, and it's really hard to leave and go. So, she said that we need children know when they live in an omnipresent environment of fear.
I'd be really interested to know if there's a correlation between recruitment or staying in a group and coercive control as a child, because you talked about cult hopping. That sounds like, I get out of a cult and I go look for another one, but actually to me what that is I have been groomed to accept authoritative control over me. I've lost my sense of identity. That's all I know. It's what I'm comfortable with. I don't know how to make choices for myself because they've been kind of that ability has been rammed out of me, and so I'm basically
honourable, a sitting duck.
A sitting duck. But anybody else who wants to do the same thing, and that could be a pimp, it could be a gang member, it could be
a relationship partner.
Yes.
The Tony Alamo Foundation panel, just as we wrap up this episode.
Oh, we'll come back to that.
Powerful. We're going to come back to this.
We need to
make sure you join us, but let's just say there were 4 people sitting on the stage, and the numbers of them that just said, I have had such difficulty in relationships, I have gone into domestic violence situations, my being was annihilated, and then I got caught up with that.
Yeah, they were children who were raised in a high control group.
And a very similar sort of group to others that we know. And so why don't we finish up there with that sort of coercive control concept, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the waking up study. Oh, that was fantastic.
I knew you'd want to talk about that, Liz.
Classic pattern, like there's a pattern to waking up, people waking up inside these groups. Let's talk about the movements of advocacy, much mandated shunning as a crime. These guys are like on steroids. It's amazing. And there's some really impactful moments I want to talk about. The panel.
I want to talk about the second generation, which you're wanting to talk about.
Yeah, the children of God. And then I've got my favourite quotes, and I've got some cracker favourite quotes. So I hope we've, enticed you enough to come back for part 2 of our discussion around our Barcelona seminar experiences. Lindy, do you feel like you've missed out on a lot?
Yeah. In particular, meals and yarns with people. That sounded really good.
It is something about being in person, but we're not going to have the knowledge that we now have. We're not going to waste it. It's going to actually help inform a lot of our further Cult Chat episodes. And, you've got lived experience, Lindy, and you're just nodding along because you actually already know all of this.
And and I probably met about 12 people who've said they'll come on Cult Chat. So I've just filled the schedule up for the next 24 months.
We have no problem. There are so many people with so much to share. So thanks for joining us for our Cult Chat episode. Make sure you get on our channels like YouTube and like us and write comments for us. We love responding. Share us around, listen in on all your favourite platforms, and come back and make sure that you cult-proof your life. Bye, everyone.
Ka kite anō.
See you next time.
If
anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.